Smile, Evan. Today, you save this family. My mother said it as if she were asking me to pose for a photograph, not surrender the rest of my life in a wedding suit tailored for someone else. The mirror in front of me was taller than the bedroom door, framed in gold, polished so perfectly it showed every detail I wished I could hide, the pale face, the trembling mouth, the dark hair brushed too neatly away from my eyes, the white formal jacket that had been altered in a panic because it had never been meant for my shoulders. It had been made for Vanessa, my older sister, the beautiful one, the cherished one, the Omega everyone in the Miller family had spent years presenting like a priceless jewel. I was the quieter son, the spare name on the family tree, the one people remembered only when they needed silence, obedience, or someone to clean up the disaster left behind by a brighter star. And this morning, Vanessa was gone. Her room had been found empty at dawn, her window open, her jewelry case emptied, and a single note resting on her pillow that said she could not marry Adrian Blackwood. By 7 o'clock, my father's face had turned the color of ash. By 8, the wedding planner was crying into her phone. By 9, my mother was standing behind me with both hands on my shoulders, pressing down gently, firmly, like she was making sure I would not run too. The Blackwoods cannot be humiliated, she whispered. The contracts are already signed. The guests are already seated. If this wedding collapses, so do we. I looked at her reflection, searching for even one crack of regret. There was none. Only fear wrapped in diamonds and perfume. He is Vanessa's fiancé, I said, though my voice sounded small in the room, swallowed by the heavy curtains and the smell of expensive roses. He does not even know me. My mother's fingers tightened. He knows the Miller name. That is all that matters today. Outside the door, footsteps moved quickly through the hall, servants carrying flowers, relatives speaking in sharp whispers, someone calling for another set of cuff links because the first pair had Vanessa's initials engraved inside the case. The whole mansion had become a beautiful machine built to erase one daughter's escape by feeding me into her place. I wanted to say no. I wanted to tear off the jacket, walk down the stairs in my own clothes, and tell every guest that I was not a replacement groom, not a signature, not a bandage for my family's pride. But then my father appeared in the doorway, older than he had looked yesterday, holding a folder full of debts I had never been allowed to see. His eyes did not beg. That would have been easier to hate. Instead, they looked empty. Evan, he said, please. One word, and the last wall inside me cracked. So I stood still while they fixed Vanessa's veil pin into my hair, while they adjusted the sleeves, while they covered the scent of panic on my skin with something clean and floral from a silver bottle. When the car pulled up outside the cathedral, cameras flashed beyond the tinted windows like lightning before a storm. My mother leaned close and murmured, remember, chin up. The world is watching. But as the doors opened and the music began, I was not thinking about the world. I was thinking about the alpha waiting at the altar, Adrian Blackwood, the man my sister had abandoned, the man everyone said was colder than winter glass, richer than old money, and proud enough to destroy anyone who made him look like a fool. Then I saw him. He stood beneath the high white arches in a black tailored suit, tall, still, and terrifyingly calm, his silver-gray eyes fixed on the aisle as if he could force the truth to walk toward him. For one breath, the entire cathedral seemed to hold still. Then his gaze landed on me, and I watched recognition fail, confusion sharpen, and something far colder take its place. He knew. Of course he knew. I was not Vanessa. I was the substitute, the insult, the proof that someone had chosen to run rather than stand beside him. Every step down the aisle felt like crossing a frozen lake, beautiful on the surface, cracking underneath. Guests whispered behind white-gloved hands. My father would not look at me. My mother smiled so hard it looked painful. Adrian never moved. When I finally reached him, the priest began speaking, but I barely heard the words. All I heard was Adrian leaning close enough for his voice to brush my ear, low and controlled, without warmth, without mercy. Do not mistake this for acceptance. The priest's voice moved through the cathedral like a distant radio playing in another room, formal and steady, while my entire world narrowed to the alpha standing in front of me. Adrian Blackwood did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His anger was not loud. It was carved into the stillness of his posture, the hard line of his jaw, the careful way he held his hands at his sides as if every motion had been locked behind discipline. I wanted to explain that I had not planned this, that I had not stolen anyone's place, that I had woken up as Evan Miller and been turned into an emergency before breakfast. But the vows began before I could breathe the words. My name sounded strange when the priest said it beside Adrian's, like two pieces from different puzzles forced into the same frame. I expected Adrian to stop the ceremony. I almost hoped he would. One cold refusal from him, and the shame would no longer be mine alone. But he looked past me toward the rows of powerful guests, toward my pale father, toward the Blackwood elders seated like judges in the front pew, and I understood. This was not a wedding anymore. It was damage control with flowers. When the priest asked if he accepted me, Adrian's eyes returned to mine. For half a second, something moved behind them, not softness, not pity, but calculation. Then he said, "I do." The words were perfect. The meaning was empty. A quiet ripple passed through the cathedral, relief disguised as applause before it was even time to clap. My turn came, and my throat tightened so painfully that I thought no sound would come out. My mother's smile burned against the side of my face. My father's silence pressed against my back. I looked at Adrian's hand, broad and steady, holding a ring chosen for Vanessa, and I wondered how many lives could be ruined by something small enough to fit on one finger. "I do," I whispered. The ring slid onto my hand, a little too loose. Of course it was. It had never been measured for me. When I placed his ring on his finger, he did not pull away, but the distance between us felt wider than the aisle I had just crossed. The priest announced us as married, and the cathedral rose in applause that sounded polished, relieved, and false. Cameras flashed. People smiled. The world accepted the lie because it was prettier than the scandal. Adrian offered his arm because the moment demanded it, and I took it because I had been trained my whole life to survive by obeying the moment. His suit sleeve was warm beneath my fingertips, but he felt as unreachable as a statue. As we walked back down the aisle together, guests leaned close to whisper. Some looked amused. Some looked offended. A few looked at me with sharp curiosity, as if trying to decide whether I was clever or pathetic. Outside, the spring air hit my face, cool and bright, and I almost stumbled from the sudden space of it. Adrian's grip tightened just enough to steady me, then released the instant he knew I would not fall. The gesture was automatic, not affectionate, and somehow that hurt more. In the long black car waiting at the curb, silence sat between us like a third passenger. The driver raised the privacy screen without being asked. I looked down at the ring on my hand, at the pale circle of skin where it did not belong, and finally found the courage to speak. I did not ask for this. Adrian turned his head slightly, his profile cold against the window light. Neither did I. His answer was calm, but the calm had edges. Vanessa humiliated both families. You were placed in front of me as a solution. I swallowed. I am a person. For the first time since the altar, he looked directly at me. His eyes were not cruel, but they were guarded so tightly that kindness could not pass through. Then understand this clearly, Evan. I will protect the public appearance of this marriage. I will not disgrace you in front of others. But do not confuse duty with trust, and do not confuse my silence today with forgiveness. The car rolled away from the cathedral, past the guests, past the flowers, past the life I had known, and toward the Blackwood estate waiting somewhere beyond the city. I sat beside my husband, wearing my sister's ring, carrying my family's debt, and realizing that the wedding had only been the first door closing behind me. The Blackwood estate did not look like a home. It looked like a verdict built from glass, stone, and money, rising behind iron gates on 30 acres of perfectly kept land north of the city. The driveway curved through rows of bare-limbed maple trees, their branches silver under the afternoon light, and every foot we traveled seemed to pull me farther from the person I had been that morning. By the time the car stopped beneath the front entrance, my hands were cold inside my sleeves. A line of staff waited on the steps, dressed in charcoal uniforms, their expressions carefully blank. At the center stood an older beta woman with steel-gray hair pinned at the nape of her neck and a tablet held against her chest like a shield. "Welcome home, Mr. Blackwood," she said to Adrian, then turned to me after the smallest pause. "Mr. Miller." "Not Blackwood. Not husband. Not even Evan." Adrian noticed. I saw it in the faint shift of his eyes, but he said nothing, and somehow his silence gave everyone permission to continue. Inside, the mansion was all height and echo, white walls, black marble floors, windows tall enough to make the sky feel like part of the furniture. There were fresh flowers on every table, but their beauty felt arranged, not alive. I followed Adrian through the foyer, carrying nothing except the weight of a ring that still slid loosely on my finger. "Mrs. Hale will show you to your room," he said. "Your room. Not ours." The words landed quietly, but they landed deep. The housekeeper inclined her head and led me up a staircase wide enough for a ballroom entrance. We passed portraits of Blackwood ancestors, alphas with proud eyes and unsmiling mouths, each one seeming to ask what someone like me was doing beneath their roof. At the end of the east hallway, Mrs. Hale opened a door to a suite larger than my bedroom back at the Miller house. It had a sitting area, a fireplace, shelves filled with books no one had touched, and windows overlooking a winter garden sealed beneath a glass roof. A beautiful room. A distant room. A room chosen because it was far from Adrian's. My luggage had already been delivered, though I had not packed it myself. Someone from my family had sent my clothes, my sketchbooks, and a small wooden box of childhood things, as if moving my life could be done with labels and tissue paper. Mrs. Hale placed the tablet on the writing desk. "Mr. Blackwood asked that you review the household terms before dinner." On the screen was a document titled Private Marital Arrangement. I read the first lines and felt my stomach sink. Separate bedrooms. Separate schedules unless public events required attendance together. No expectation of emotional companionship. No discussion of heirs. No unauthorized interviews. No public contradiction of the marriage narrative agreed upon by both families. It was not a marriage agreement. It was a map of where I was not allowed to exist. "Does he expect me to sign this tonight?" I asked. Mrs. Hale looked almost sympathetic, but years of service had trained it out of her voice. "He expects clarity." After she left, the silence of the room expanded around me. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the document until the words blurred. Downstairs, somewhere beyond the walls, Adrian Blackwood was probably returning to phone calls, contracts, and a life that had been inconvenienced by me but not overturned. My entire future had been moved like furniture, yet for him, this was only a problem to manage. At 7, a soft chime announced dinner. I changed into a dark blue sweater and slacks, something simple, something mine, then followed a young staff member to a dining room long enough to make conversation feel impossible. Adrian was already seated at the far end, reviewing papers beside his untouched plate. A second place had been set nearly 12 feet away. He did not look up until Saturday. "You do not have to perform discomfort," he said. "No one here is watching." I folded my hands beneath the table so he would not see them tighten. "I am not performing." His gaze lifted then, sharp and unreadable. "Good. I dislike performances." I thought of Vanessa's empty room, my mother's forced smile, the vows spoken like damage control, and a tired laugh almost escaped me. Instead, I said, "Then you married into the wrong family." For the first time, Adrian went completely still, not offended, not amused, but caught off guard. The silence that followed was different from the one in the car. It had a pulse. Then he set his papers aside. Sign the arrangement after you read it fully. Ask questions through Mrs. Hale. Not through you. We have nothing personal to discuss. The words should not have surprised me. Still, they found a soft place and pressed. I looked down at the ring on my hand, the one meant for my sister, and gently twisted it until it stopped slipping. Then I will make this easy for both of us, I said. I will not ask you for anything. Adrian's face did not change, but his eyes lowered to my hand for one brief second, to the ring that did not fit, to the promise that had never belonged to me. He looked away first. Dinner continued in silence, polished silver against porcelain, rain beginning to tap against the tall windows, and somewhere inside that enormous house, I understood the truth of my first night as Adrian Blackwood's husband. I had not been brought here to be loved. I had been brought here to be contained. By the end of the first week, the Blackwood estate had learned how to move around me without touching me. Staff members lowered their eyes when I entered a room, not out of respect, but out of careful discomfort, as if acknowledging me too directly might force the house to admit what I was. The replacement. The wrong Omega. The temporary solution wearing a permanent ring. Mrs. Hale remained polite, but even her politeness had borders. She told me which rooms were available to me, which hallways led to private family offices, which doors required permission, and which parts of the grounds were best avoided when Adrian was hosting business guests. No one said I was unwelcome. They simply arranged the house so I would understand it. Adrian and I became experts at passing each other like strangers in a hotel. He left before sunrise most mornings, his car rolling down the long driveway while the sky was still gray. He returned after dark, the faint scent of cold air and cedar clinging to his coat, his phone already in his hand, his attention already somewhere else. When we did meet, it was in polished spaces made for appearances, the dining room, the foyer, the occasional formal breakfast where he read financial reports and I pretended toast had flavor. He never insulted me. He never raised his voice. He never broke the rules he had written. That was the hardest part. Cruelty would have given me something solid to push against. Adrian offered distance wrapped in perfect manners, and distance was harder to survive because it made me feel unreasonable for being hurt. So I built my own small life in the corners he had left unclaimed. I found the library first, a 2-story room with a rolling ladder, leather chairs, and tall windows facing the winter garden. Most of the books were untouched, bought by someone who valued the appearance of knowledge more than the comfort of reading. I began spending afternoons there with tea, sketching the shape of the garden through the glass roof. The garden itself became mine next, though no one gave it to me. It was a quiet glasshouse behind the east wing, filled with white camellias, pale roses, and small citrus trees planted in square stone pots. Some of the flowers had started to brown at the edges from neglect. I asked Mrs. Hale for gardening gloves, and she hesitated as if an Omega husband trimming dead leaves might disturb the family legacy. But the gloves appeared outside my door the next morning. After that, I went to the glasshouse every day. I learned the watering schedule. I cut away damage. I opened the vents when the air grew too damp. I liked the simple honesty of plants. They did not care whose suit I had worn at the altar. They only responded to whether I stayed. Sometimes, late at night, I left a cup of chamomile tea on the small table outside Adrian's study. I told myself it was not affection. It was habit, or courtesy, or maybe a rebellion against becoming as cold as the house expected me to be. The first 2 nights, the cup was still full by morning. The third night, it was gone. No thank you followed. No mention at breakfast. But the empty cup remained on the tray, and for some reason, that tiny absence felt louder than words. On Friday evening, the Blackwood family came for dinner. Adrian's grandmother, Eleanor Blackwood, arrived in pearls and a black dress, her white hair swept back like a crown. She looked at me once and understood everything she wanted to believe. "You are younger than your sister," she said as we sat beneath the chandelier. "Quieter, too." I smiled because I had been raised to survive rooms like this. Most people say that like it is a flaw. Her brows lifted. Across the table, Adrian paused with his water glass halfway to his mouth. Eleanor's mouth curved, but not kindly. And is it not? Before I could answer, another cousin murmured, at least the Millers sent someone. A few soft laughs moved around the table, polished and sharp. My face warmed, but I kept my hands steady in my lap. I had been humiliated enough in 1 week to understand that dignity was sometimes only the refusal to make pain entertaining. My family made a choice, I said carefully. So did yours when they allowed the ceremony to continue. The room went silent. Adrian set down his glass. For a second, I thought he would correct me, remind me of my place, protect the peace of his own bloodline. Instead, he looked at his cousin and said, calm as winter, Evan is a guest at this table and a member of this household. Speak accordingly. The words were not warm. They were not love. But they landed like a door closing between me and the laughter. No one challenged him. Dinner continued, quieter than before. I did not look at Adrian again until dessert, and when I did, he was already watching me with an expression I could not name. Not trust. Not softness. Something more dangerous for both of us. Curiosity. The night Adrian first noticed my scent, the rain had turned the entire estate into a world of blurred glass and silver shadows. It started just after dinner, a quiet storm at first, then a hard spring downpour that struck the roof and windows with restless fingers. I had been in the library when I heard Mrs. Hale speaking anxiously to one of the gardeners near the east hallway. The wind had forced open one of the roof vents in the glasshouse, and water was coming in over the camellias. The gardener who usually handled it lived almost 30 minutes away, and the storm had already pushed branches across the county road. I should have stayed where I was. I was not responsible for the Blackwood garden, or the Blackwood house, or any fragile thing growing inside it. But I thought of the white flowers I had spent days trimming back into life, the small green buds finally brave enough to open, and before I could talk myself out of caring, I grabbed my coat and ran through the covered walkway toward the winter garden. Cold rain blew sideways through the open vent, scattering drops across the stone floor. The air smelled of wet leaves, damp soil, and frightened blossoms. I found the long metal pole used to pull the vent closed, but the latch had jammed halfway. I stretched onto my toes, both hands gripping the pole, my sleeves soaked through, my shoes slipping on the wet stone. Come on, I whispered, as if the house might listen if I asked softly enough. The vent moved an inch, then stuck again. I tried once more, harder, and the pole jerked loose. My balance disappeared. For one suspended second, I saw the glass roof above me, dark with rain, saw the white camellias trembling in their pots, saw my own hand reaching for nothing. Then a firm arm caught me before I hit the floor. The world stopped moving. Adrian stood behind me, one hand steady at my elbow, the other braced at my back with careful restraint. His coat was wet from the rain, his dark hair touched with water, his expression sharpened by something more than surprise. "What are you doing out here alone?" he asked. His voice was low, controlled, but not cold in the usual way. I pulled in a breath, and too late, I realized the rain had washed away the floral scent veil my mother's staff had used on the wedding day and the mild suppressants I had kept wearing out of habit. The glasshouse was warm beneath the storm, my pulse was racing, and my true scent rose before I could stop it, soft and clean and aching, like white flowers after rain, like honey barely warmed by sunlight, like every feeling I had tried to bury since the altar. Adrian went completely still. His hand did not tighten, but the air around him changed. The polished distance he carried like armor cracked for the first time, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet shock of a man hearing his name spoken by fate from another room. I stepped away from him as soon as I could stand, embarrassment rushing up my throat. I was only trying to close the vent. He did not answer. His eyes were fixed on me, not on my face exactly, but on the space around me, as if the air itself had become impossible to understand. Rain hammered against the glass. A camellia petal fell onto the wet stone between us. "Adrian?" I said, because the silence had become too heavy. His gaze snapped back to mine. For an instant, I saw something raw there, something startled and almost unwilling, before he buried it so quickly I wondered if I had imagined it. He turned, took the pole from the floor, and forced the vent shut with one controlled motion. The storm dulled at once, sealed outside the glass. "You could have been hurt," he said. I was not. That is not the point. The answer came too quickly. Too sharply. It sounded almost like concern, and that frightened me more than his distance ever had. I folded my arms across my soaked sweater, suddenly aware of the cold. "You do not need to worry about me. It was in the arrangement, remember? No personal obligations." His jaw tightened. The words had found him. Good. I wanted them to. But instead of leaving, he removed his coat and held it out. I stared at it. "Take it," he said. "You are freezing." I should have refused. Pride wanted me to refuse. But my hands were shaking, and the coat was warm when I accepted it, heavy with cedar, winter air, and him. The moment it settled over my shoulders, his expression changed again, so briefly it was almost nothing. His eyes lowered to where the black fabric swallowed my frame, and something in his alpha stillness faltered. Not possession. Not tenderness. Recognition, maybe, arriving too early and unwanted. Mrs. Hale appeared at the glasshouse entrance with towels, stopping short when she saw us standing close in the rain-dim light. Adrian stepped back first. "Have the floor dried before morning," he said, his voice returned to its usual calm. Then he looked at me once more, and the calm did not reach his eyes. "And make sure Evan has warm tea sent to his room." He left before I could speak. I stood beneath the glass roof, wrapped in his coat, surrounded by rescued flowers and the fading echo of a moment neither of us understood yet. But that night, for the first time, when I placed chamomile outside his study, I found another cup already waiting there, untouched, still steaming, meant for me. By morning, the entire rhythm of the house had changed, though no one admitted it. Adrian still left before sunrise, still returned calls in that quiet voice built for boardrooms and impossible decisions, still kept his distance at breakfast with the same careful posture he had always worn. But his eyes found me more often now. Not openly. Never long enough for anyone else to notice. Just brief moments across the dining room, in the reflection of a window, over the edge of a newspaper he was not truly reading. Each glance felt like a question he refused to ask. I tried to pretend nothing had shifted in the glasshouse, but the world did not help me. His coat had been returned to his room, cleaned and pressed, yet the memory of its weight stayed on my shoulders. The cup of tea he had left outside my room became a quiet argument inside my chest. I told myself it was kindness done out of guilt, not concern, not curiosity, certainly not anything dangerous enough to hope for. Then, 3 days after the storm, Vanessa came home. She arrived at the Blackwood estate in a cream-colored car shortly after noon, wearing sunglasses, a pale cashmere coat, and the kind of smile that made every mistake look intentional. I saw her from the library window as she stepped onto the front drive like a woman returning from a weekend trip, not a bride who had abandoned her own wedding and left her younger brother to stand in her place. My hands went cold around the book I was holding. Mrs. Hale entered minutes later, her face composed but tense. "Miss Miller is in the front parlor," she said. "She has requested to see Mr. Blackwood." "Of course she has," I replied, though my voice sounded far calmer than I felt. I did not go downstairs immediately. Some part of me wanted Adrian to handle it, to send her away, to prove that the small crack in his distance had meant something. But waiting made me feel weaker, so I set the book down and walked to the parlor myself. Vanessa turned when I entered, lowering her sunglasses with one graceful hand. She was exactly as she had always been, golden blonde hair, flawless makeup, pale skin glowing as if stress had never been invented for people like her. Her eyes moved over my sweater, my simple slacks, the ring still loose on my finger, and her smile sharpened. "Evan," she said softly. "Look at you. Married life suits you better than I expected." "Running away suited you exactly as expected," I said before I could stop myself. Her smile did not move, but something behind it hardened. "You should be thanking me. Without me, you would still be invisible." The words were familiar enough to hurt in the old places. Before I could answer, Adrian appeared in the doorway. The air changed at once, not dramatically, but with that quiet pull his presence always carried. Vanessa turned toward him, and for the first time since arriving, her confidence became almost radiant. "Adrian," she said, softening her voice. "I know I owe you an explanation." He stepped into the room but did not approach her. "You owe many people an explanation." Vanessa lowered her gaze beautifully, the way she had practiced since childhood. "I was afraid. The wedding, the pressure, the families watching every move. I panicked. But I came back because I realized I made a terrible mistake." She took one step closer, offering her hand as if the story had already forgiven her. "It was always supposed to be us." I expected something in Adrian to respond. Anger, maybe. Old pride. The memory of the woman he had agreed to marry. But when Vanessa's fingers touched his sleeve, nothing happened. He looked down at her hand the way a man might look at rain on a window, present but unmoved. Then he gently removed her touch. Vanessa blinked. "So did I. The marriage has already taken place," he said. "That cannot be undone by regret." Her eyes flicked toward me, bright with disbelief. "You cannot be serious. Evan was a substitute. Everyone knows that." The word hit the room like a glass dropped on marble. I felt myself step back, not from fear, but from the sudden certainty that I had heard it too many times. Adrian noticed. His head turned just slightly, following the movement, and the moment I pulled away, his attention left Vanessa completely. His gaze found me with unsettling speed, as if some invisible thread had tightened between us. Vanessa saw it. Her expression changed before she could hide it. "Adrian," she said, sharper now. "You do not even know him." Adrian did not answer right away. He was still looking at me, and something in his face had gone quiet in a way I did not understand. Then he said, "No. I do not." The honesty should have hurt. Instead, it felt like the first real thing he had ever said in front of her. He looked back at Vanessa. "But I know enough to understand who stayed." Silence filled the parlor. Vanessa's beautiful mask cracked for 1 second, revealing something small, jealous, and frightened underneath. Then she smiled again, but it no longer looked effortless. "Then perhaps you should ask yourself why he stayed," she said. Duty can look very convincing when someone finally gets a taste of a life meant for someone else. I left before either of them could see my face change. But as I reached the hallway, I heard Adrian say my name, not loudly, not as a command, but with a roughness that made me stop. I did not turn around. If I did, I might have seen too much. If I did, I might have believed he wanted me to stay for a reason neither of us was ready to name. By the time the Blackwood family announced the formal reception to repair the damage left by the wedding, Vanessa had already learned how to smile like a victim. She moved through the estate as if the walls remembered her better than they remembered me, speaking gently to Mrs. Hale, complimenting the flowers in the front hall, laughing with distant cousins who had gone very quiet around me. Everyone understood the purpose of the reception without saying it aloud. It was meant to prove that the scandal had ended, that the alliance still stood. That the wrong groom could be polished into an acceptable truth if enough expensive people gathered beneath enough chandeliers. I stood beside Adrian at the entrance to the ballroom while guests arrived in dark suits and jeweled gowns, each handshake another reminder that our marriage had become a performance everyone was willing to attend. Adrian was courteous, controlled, and unreadable, but he no longer stood as far from me as he once had. Sometimes his sleeve brushed mine. Sometimes his hand hovered near my back when the crowd pressed too close, never touching unless necessary, but always there. That almost made the night harder. Distance had been painful, but clarity was simple. This new careful attention felt like standing near a fire I was not sure would warm me or burn me. Vanessa watched all of it. She waited until the ballroom was full, until the Blackwood elders were present, until my parents had arrived with faces painted in public gratitude, and then she stepped into the center of the room with a champagne glass in her hand and sorrow in her eyes. "Before everyone continues pretending," she said, her voice light enough to sound wounded instead of cruel, "perhaps we should speak honestly about what happened." The music softened. Conversations died one by one. Adrian went still beside me. Vanessa turned toward him first, then toward me, and the expression on her face was almost tender. "My brother was never meant for this life. Evan has always been fragile. Easily influenced. Our parents worried about him for years. My mother looked down. My father closed his eyes." The room seemed to tilt. Vanessa continued, each word wrapped in silk. "I left because I was afraid of being trapped in a marriage arranged for money. But Evan stayed because he wanted what was mine. The name, the house, the security. Can anyone blame him? He had lived in my shadow his entire life." Something inside me went very quiet. Not broken. Not angry. Just quiet, the way snow silences a street before dawn. I could feel every eye turn toward me, measuring, judging, remembering the loose ring, the altered suit, the whispered word replacement. Adrian took one step forward, but I lifted my hand slightly, not to stop him forever, only to stop him from saving me before I had tried to stand on my own. "You are right about one thing," I said, and my voice surprised me by carrying across the ballroom. "I was never meant for this life. I was not raised to command rooms, or charm powerful families, or turn abandonment into a story where I am the villain." Vanessa's smile tightened. I looked at my parents then, and the old ache rose, but it did not own me. I stayed because everyone I loved asked me to. I stayed because a family name was placed on my shoulders like a debt. I stayed because no one in that cathedral cared whether I wanted a future, only whether I could protect theirs. The silence changed. It was not kind yet, but it was listening. Then heat bloomed across my left wrist, sudden and bright. I looked down. Beneath the cuff of my sleeve, a pale silver mark had appeared on my skin, shaped like a thin crescent of light. A sound moved through the ballroom, disbelief traveling faster than breath. Across from me, Adrian inhaled sharply. His own hand lifted, and there, at the inside of his wrist, the same mark was glowing through the edge of his shirt cuff. For several seconds, no one moved. The old stories called it a fate mark, rare enough that some people dismissed it as romance invented for desperate omegas and lonely alphas. But every person in that room knew what matching marks meant. Recognition. Bond. A truth older than contracts, stronger than arrangements, impossible to fake. Vanessa's glass trembled in her hand. "No," she whispered, and for the first time, she sounded young and frightened. Adrian looked at his wrist, then at mine, and every wall in his face seemed to fall inward at once. Not in weakness, but in realization. The distance, the storm, the scent in the glasshouse, the way his attention followed me before his pride could stop it. It had all been leading here. I covered the mark with my sleeve, not because I was ashamed, but because I suddenly understood how dangerous it was to be wanted by destiny before being chosen by the heart. Adrian stepped toward me slowly, his voice quiet enough that only I could hear the break-in. Evan. I met his eyes, and for the first time since the wedding, he did not look at me like a problem, a duty, or a question. He looked at me like the answer had been standing beside him all along, patiently bleeding in silence while everyone else called it grace. For one long breath after the fate marks appeared, the ballroom forgot how to breathe. Every polished rule that had held the evening together cracked beneath the soft silver light on our wrists. I could hear the rain beginning again outside the tall windows, a gentle tapping against the glass, as if the storm from the garden had returned to finish what it started. Vanessa was the first to move. She stepped toward Adrian with her face pale beneath perfect makeup, her voice lowered into something sharp and desperate. This changes nothing. Marks can be misunderstood. Stress can trigger false responses. You know that, Adrian. Adrian did not look at her. His eyes were still on me, and for once, there was no calculation in them, no boardroom control, no winter distance. There was shock, yes, and regret, and something deeper that made my chest ache because it had arrived too late to be simple. Eleanor Blackwood rose from her seat near the front of the room, her pearls catching the chandelier light. Adrian, she said, each syllable careful. This is a family matter. Do not make a public decision while emotions are high. That was when he finally looked away from me. He turned to face the room, and the alpha everyone feared seemed to settle over his shoulders, not as arrogance, but as clarity. There has already been too much public pretending in this family, he said. His voice was quiet, yet it reached every corner of the ballroom. Vanessa's lips parted. My father took a step forward, then stopped. My mother pressed a hand to her necklace like she was holding herself together by the clasp. Adrian reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a folded document. I recognized the header before he fully opened it. The private marital arrangement. The map of my allowed silence. The paper he had given me on my first night in his house. He held it up between two fingers, then tore it cleanly down. The middle. The sound was not loud, but it moved through the room like a bell. This arrangement was written when I believed Evan Miller had been placed in my life as an obligation, he said. It was unfair then. It is unacceptable now. My throat tightened. I wanted to look away, but I could not. Adrian turned toward my parents next. You asked your son to carry a burden that was never his. You allowed him to stand alone in a room full of people who should have protected him. Whatever business remains between our families will be handled by attorneys from this point forward, not by using Evan's life as collateral. My mother flinched. My father looked smaller than I had ever seen him. Vanessa let out a soft laugh that was almost a gasp. So that is it. A glowing mark, and suddenly I am the villain. He gets everything by standing there looking wounded. For the first time, Adrian's expression hardened, not with rage, but with disappointment so complete it felt colder than anger. You left because you wanted freedom. You had that right. But you came back and tried to destroy him for surviving the consequences you abandoned. Vanessa's eyes shone, but whether from tears or fury, I could not tell. You were supposed to choose me. The words broke something open in the silence. Adrian looked at her with a sadness that carried no promise. No. I was supposed to marry you. Those are not the same thing. Then he turned back to me. The entire room watched as Adrian Blackwood, the untouchable alpha, crossed the marble floor and stopped an arm's length away. He did not reach for me. He did not claim me. He did not use the fate mark as permission. Instead, he removed the ring from his own finger, the ring from the ceremony built on panic and debt, and held it in his palm. This ring was part of a bargain, he said, his voice lower now, meant for me but heard by everyone. You deserved a choice before you were ever asked for a vow. He set the ring on a nearby table, then did something no one in that ballroom expected. He lowered himself to one knee, not like a man surrendering his power, but like a man finally understanding that power meant nothing if it could not humble itself before the person it had hurt. A quiet sound passed through the guests. My heart struck once, hard and painful. Adrian looked up at me, and the silver mark on his wrist glowed beneath his cuff. I cannot undo the aisle, the contract, or the coldness I gave you when you deserved protection. I cannot ask you to trust destiny when I failed you as a man. But I can ask for the chance to begin again, without your sister's shadow, without our family's demands, without pretending that a bond is the same as love. My eyes burned. Around us, the ballroom, the guests, Vanessa, my parents, all of it faded to the edges of the moment. Adrian, I whispered, because his name was the only answer I could find. He opened his hand, empty now, no ring, no bargain, no trap. Not tonight, he said gently. Not because they are watching. Not because the mark appeared. Only when you want to answer. And for the first time since I had been placed in someone else's wedding clothes, the choice was mine. I did not give Adrian an answer that night. The ballroom wanted one, Vanessa wanted one, my parents feared one, and every glowing whisper of the fate mark beneath my sleeve seemed to beg for one, but for the first time in my life, I chose not to be rushed. I walked out of that room with my head high and my heart shaking, and Adrian let me go. He did not follow me into the hallway. He did not send a message through Mrs. Hale. He did not use the bond, the marriage, or the Blackwood name to pull me back before I was ready. The next morning, I left the estate for a small lakeside cottage 2 hours north, a quiet place owned by an old friend from college who asked no questions beyond whether I preferred coffee or tea. For 3 weeks, I lived without chandeliers, contracts, or family voices telling me who I owed my future to. I slept with the windows open. I walked along the lake in worn sneakers and an old gray sweater. I sketched trees, water, and the shape of my own hands until they looked like they belonged to me again. Adrian wrote 1 letter each week. Not dramatic letters. Not desperate ones. He told me. He had ended the remaining marriage clauses, separated the Blackwood business from my family's debts, and made sure my parents could no longer trade guilt for access to me. He told me Vanessa had left for California after the reception, not forgiven, not destroyed, simply gone to build a life that no longer required mine as a mirror. He told me Mrs. Hale had opened the winter garden vents every morning because the camellias were blooming early. Only at the end of the 3rd letter did he write what mattered most. I am learning that patience is not absence. It is care without pressure. I read that sentence 4 times. The mark on my wrist warmed, but it did not command me. That was when I understood. Destiny had opened a door, but I still had to decide whether I wanted to walk through it. On the first Sunday of May, I returned to the Blackwood estate. The maple trees along the driveway were green now, the hard silver branches softened by spring. Adrian was waiting in the winter garden, not in a suit, not behind a desk, but in shirt sleeves with soil on one cuff, looking deeply out of place beside a tray of repotted camellias. When he saw me, he stood so quickly that one small gardening trowel fell to the stone floor with a harmless clatter. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The glass roof above us held the afternoon sun, and every flower I had saved from the storm was open. "You came back," he said. His voice was careful, as if hope was something fragile he was afraid to hold too tightly. "I came to see the garden," I said. His mouth softened, almost a smile. Of course. He did not move closer. That was how I knew he had changed. The old Adrian would have managed the moment, shaped it, controlled it until it became safe. This Adrian waited. I walked past him to the white camellias and touched one bloom with my fingertips. "I cannot be your apology," I said. "I cannot be proof that you became better. And I cannot live as someone chosen only because fate embarrassed everyone into telling the truth." "I know," he said. "Then what do you want from me?" Adrian looked down at the silver mark on his wrist, then back at me. "Nothing you are not ready to give." The answer was so quiet that it loosened the last knot inside my chest. I turned toward him fully. "Ask me again, then. Not as an alpha. Not as a Blackwood. Not because of the mark." His breath caught. He crossed the space between us slowly and stopped with enough distance for me to choose the rest. "Evan," he said, my name no longer a question he feared, "may I walk beside you?" It was not the proposal the world expected. There was no ring in his hand, no audience, no bargain dressed as romance. There was only the garden, the spring light, and a man who had finally learned that love did not begin with possession. I placed my hand in his. The marks on our wrists glowed softly, but this time they felt less like fate and more like witness. Yes, I said. Beside me. Adrian smiled then, truly smiled, and the cold house around us seemed to exhale. Months later, we held a second ceremony in that same winter garden, small enough that every face present belonged to someone who had earned the right to be there. My ring fit perfectly because I chose it myself. Adrian cried before he finished his vows, which Eleanor Blackwood pretended not to notice, though she handed him a handkerchief twice. Mrs. Hale cried openly. I laughed for the first time in a wedding suit that had been made for me. And when Adrian kissed my hand in front of the camellias, there was no shadow of Vanessa, no debt, no replacement, no lie polished for public approval. There was only the life we built after the door closed on the one others tried to force upon us, and the quiet truth I carried from that day forward. Fate may recognize you in an instant, but love proves itself by staying, changing, and choosing you again in the morning.